Of all the stories you'll hear, I promise this one will stay with you. It's a story about how a single sentence from a stranger can change the entire map of your life. It starts with a black woman having a dinner alone when a billionaire stranger whispered, "Pretend I'm your husband. How are you all doing today? I hope you're feeling good, wherever you're watching from. Is it sunny where you are, or is it a bit gloomy outside? Grab a drink, get comfortable, because you are about to be hooked." They say life is a series of quiet moments punctuated by explosions that define you. For 29 years, my life had been nothing but quiet moments. My name is Amara Okaro. This is the story of how I went from being a woman, so invisible she had to celebrate her own successes alone, to becoming the woman who decided the fate of a global empire. And it all began with that whisper in a crowded restaurant, the very same restaurant where, 1 year later, I would sign the deal that dismantled the world of the man who tried to use me as a pawn. But let me tell you how it started. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Let me start from the beginning. I was 29 years old, and by all accounts, I had done everything right. I believed in the simple math of life. Hard work plus good intentions equals a happy existence. I'd graduated with honors, landed a competitive job in corporate finance, and just that day, I had been promoted to senior analyst. It was the biggest achievement of my career. I'd called my mom, who was thrilled. I texted my 2 best friends, who were busy with their own husbands and kids, but sent a flurry of congratulatory emojis. And then silence. The phone didn't ring again. There was no one to take me out, no one to pop a bottle of champagne with, no one to share the victory. So I did what any self-respecting, successful, and profoundly lonely woman would do. I made a reservation for one at the Sovereign, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, a place I couldn't have afforded a week ago. I put on my best dress, a simple, elegant navy blue sheath, and decided to celebrate myself. I believed that love would find me eventually, but first, I had to build my own kingdom. I was the princess who was her own knight in shining armor. I was the reliable one, the strong one, the one who never needed anything. It was a role I had perfected, and it was a role that was slowly suffocating me. The restaurant was exactly as intimidating as I'd imagined. Couples murmured to each other over candlelight, and business partners shook hands on deals worth more than my entire apartment building. And there I was, a solitary woman at a table for 2. I ordered the most expensive steak on the menu and a glass of red wine, trying to project an aura of confidence of a woman who chose to be alone. But inside, I felt like a fraud. Every laugh from a nearby table felt like a spotlight on my solitude. That's when I first noticed him. He was sitting across the room, at a table with 3 other men in severe, dark suits. He was different. While they were stiff and loud, he was relaxed, leaning back in his chair with an easy grace that seemed out of place. He had this intense focus, his eyes scanning the room not with arrogance, but with a kind of quiet calculation. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I felt a strange jolt, a feeling of being truly seen for the first time all night. I quickly looked down at my menu, my cheeks burning. I dismissed it. A man like that, in a place like this, wouldn't be looking at me. I was just part of the scenery. I focused on my meal, savoring every bite, determined to enjoy my celebration. A few minutes later, I felt a presence beside my table. I looked up, expecting a waiter. It was him, the man from across the room. He was taller up close, with a presence that seemed to command the space around him. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice low and smooth. "My name is Julian." Before I could respond, he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that sent a shiver down my spine. "I need you to do something for me. It's strange, and you have every right to say no." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "In about 60 seconds, 2 men are going to walk through that door. They are looking for me. They cannot find me alone. I need you to pretend I'm your husband." My mind went completely blank. I stared at him, trying to process the sheer audacity of his request. Was this a joke? A line? A prank? But the look in his eyes was anything but playful. There was a raw urgency there, a flicker of something that looked like desperation. "Why?" I managed to breathe out. "It's complicated," he whispered, his eyes flicking towards the entrance. They're investors I'm trying to avoid. A deal gone sour. Seeing me on a quiet dinner date with my wife makes me seem stable, unavailable, boring. Seeing me alone makes me look like an easy target. The ticking clock he just set in motion was deafening. 60 seconds. My entire life, I had played by the rules. I never took risks. I was the good girl, the smart employee, the dependable friend. Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to call for the manager, to run. But another part of me, the part that had felt invisible just moments before, was intrigued. For one night, I could be someone else. Someone who had a husband. Someone whose life was exciting enough to involve secret deals and men in suits. It was a fantasy, a dangerous one, but it was irresistible. Okay, I heard myself say, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. Okay, I'll do it. A wave of relief washed over his face. He slid into the chair opposite me without a moment's hesitation, as if he'd been sitting there all along. Thank you, he murmured, his hand reaching across the table and covering mine. His touch was warm and firm. Just follow my lead. And please, try to look happy to see me. Just then, the grand entrance of the restaurant opened. Two large, imposing men walked in. They looked less like investors and more like bodyguards. They scanned the room methodically, their eyes sweeping over tables, their faces grim. Julian squeezed my hand gently. I forced a smile, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at Julian and tried to channel every romantic movie I'd ever seen. His thumb drew a slow circle on the back of my hand. Tell me about your day, darling, he said, his voice now filled with a loving warmth that was shockingly convincing. As the men's gaze passed over our table, Julian leaned in and kissed my cheek, a soft, lingering gesture that felt both completely staged and unbelievably real. The men looked at us for a moment, saw just another happy couple lost in their own world, and then continued their scan before turning and leaving the restaurant. The air left my lungs in a rush. The danger, or whatever it was, had passed. The entire episode couldn't have lasted more than 3 minutes. Julian pulled back slowly, though he didn't let go of my hand. You were incredible, he said, his voice returning to its quiet, intense tone. I owe you. More than you know. Who were they? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Business associates who don't take no for an answer, he said vaguely, finally releasing my hand. Thank you, Amara. I froze. My fork clattered onto my plate. I had never told him my name. I hadn't said a single word except, why and okay. I hadn't introduced myself. How? I started, my mind racing. How do you know my name? A small, unreadable smile played on his lips. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of calm once more. I know that you were just promoted to senior analyst at Sterling Thorne Capital, a move you made after 3 years at a small but brilliant acquisitions firm called Nexus Partners, a firm I happen to own. Everything stopped. The quiet buzz of the restaurant, the clinking of glasses, the air in my lungs. He didn't just choose me at random. He knew who I was. This wasn't a chance encounter. This was an appointment. And the devastating hook wasn't the whisper in my ear. It was the realization that my lonely, celebratory dinner for one hadn't been an accident. I had been summoned. The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. Nexus Partners, the small, brilliant firm where I had cut my teeth, where I had poured every ounce of my energy for 3 years. The place I had left for the bigger salary and shinier title at Sterling Thorne. A place he owned. My carefully constructed celebration, my independent act of defiance against loneliness, was a lie. It wasn't my choice. It was his. You own Nexus? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The steak on my plate suddenly seemed obscene, the wine sour in my mouth. Why didn't anyone know? I prefer to keep a low profile on my smaller ventures, he said, his calmness a stark contrast to the chaos erupting inside me. It allows me to see things more clearly, to see people as they truly are. He gestured around the opulent dining room. This world is full of noise. I find value in the quiet places. I've been following your career for a year, Amara. Your analysis of the Petrocorp merger was brilliant. You saw an angle no one else did. When you left Nexus, I was disappointed. You are meant for more than a corner office at Sterling Thorne. His words were a perfectly calculated cocktail of praise and validation, designed to soothe the part of me that was screaming in alarm. He wasn't a random stranger. He was a silent benefactor, a powerful man who had recognized my talent from afar. The narrative was intoxicating. It was the story I had always wanted to believe about myself, that my hard work was not going unnoticed, that I was special. So tonight, I trailed off, unable to form the question. The men, the bad deal, what was that? Unnecessary fiction, he admitted without a hint of shame. I needed to speak with you, but I couldn't just summon you to my office. It would have been indelicate. I needed to see if you were the person I thought you were. Someone who is calm under pressure. Someone who can think on her feet. You are. He paid for my dinner, an act he performed with such casual authority that I didn't even think to protest. He walked me out of the restaurant, and when he offered me a ride home, I accepted. I told myself it was just a ride, but as I settled into the plush leather of his car, I knew I was crossing a threshold. The story of my life was no longer just my own. That night began the whirlwind. Julian Astor was not just a billionaire, he was a force of nature. He pursued me with a gentle, relentless intensity that dismantled all my defenses. It wasn't about lavish gifts or grand gestures. It was in the way he listened, the way his eyes never left mine when I spoke. He'd send a courier to my office with my favorite coffee just before a big presentation, with a simple note that said, "Knock, I'm dead." He called me after my meetings, not to ask if I had succeeded, but to ask how I felt. He was interested in the architecture of my mind, the things that drove me, the fears I kept hidden. For a woman who had spent a decade making herself an island, his attention felt like a warm, healing tide. I told him about my family, about being the eldest daughter of Nigerian immigrants, the weight of their expectations, my drive to give them a life of comfort they had never known. I confessed my deepest fear, that for all my professional success, my personal life would always be a barren landscape. He, in turn, opened up to me. He told me about his own lonely childhood, raised by a series of nannies in a house that was more museum than home. He spoke of a previous business partner who had betrayed him, stealing his ideas and nearly ruining him. "Loyalty is the only currency that matters, Amara," he told me one night, his hand tracing the line of my jaw. "Everything else is just noise." His vulnerability was the final key that unlocked my heart. He wasn't just a powerful man, he was a wounded one, just like me. We were two lonely souls who had found each other in a world that didn't understand. My best friend, Chloe, was not convinced. Chloe and I had been friends since college, and she possessed a healthy cynicism that I had always lacked. "It just seems too perfect," she said over brunch one Saturday, about 2 months into my relationship with Julian. A secret billionaire who just happens to be your old boss, who just happens to need you to pretend to be his wife, and who just happens to be the most perfect, attentive man on the planet. She stirred her latte, her brow furrowed. "Life isn't a fairy tale, Amara." "It's not perfect," I argued a little too defensively. "It's just good. He sees me, Chloe. All of me. Or he's showing you exactly what you want to see," she countered. Powerful men don't get to where they are by being straightforward. They're masters of strategy. In business and in life. I dismissed her concerns as jealousy. Chloe was happily married to her college sweetheart, but their life was ordinary. Mine felt extraordinary. I was in love with a brilliant, complicated man who valued my mind as much as my heart. I was no longer the invisible woman. I was Julian Astor's partner. He started asking for my opinion on his deals, spreading financial reports out on the floor of his stunning, minimalist home that overlooked the city. He'd listen intently, nodding, making me feel not just like a girlfriend, but like a confidant and equal. We built a bubble, a world that consisted only of the two of us, our shared ambitions, and our whispered promises of a future together. The first betrayal was so small, I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday night. Julian was supposed to be in Tokyo for a conference. He called me, his voice tired but warm, telling me he missed me. We spoke for 20 minutes before he said he had an early morning and needed to sleep. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a news alert from a financial app when followed. It was a photo from a charity gala in New York, and there in the background, unmistakable in his tailored suit, was Julian. He wasn't the focus of the picture, but he was there. His head was turned, and he was speaking to a striking redhead in a green dress. My blood ran cold. He was supposed to be in Tokyo. He was in New York. He had lied. My first impulse was panic. My second was to call Chloe. But I didn't. I couldn't bear to hear her say, "I told you so." Instead, I took a deep breath and did what I did best. I analyzed the data. The photo was time-stamped. He had been at that gala at the exact time he was on the phone with me, telling me he was in his hotel room on the other side of the world. When he called the next day, full of stories about his meetings in Tokyo, I didn't confront him. I couldn't. I was too afraid of what the answer would be, too terrified of shattering the beautiful world we had built. I held on to the lie. I let it sit inside me, a cold, hard knot of doubt. When he came home, he brought me a beautiful silk scarf he said he bought for me in a market in Kyoto. I thanked him, my smile feeling stiff and unnatural. That night, as he slept, I went through his suit jacket, my hands trembling. I didn't know what I was looking for. A receipt, a business card, anything. In the inside pocket, I found a small diamond earring. It was delicate, expensive, and definitely not mine. I stood in the darkness of his closet for a long time, the earring cold in my palm. This was it. The evidence. Chloe was right. The fairy tale was a lie. My heart ached with a pain so sharp, it felt physical. The next morning, I placed the earring on the kitchen counter as he was making coffee. I didn't have to say a word. He looked at it, then at me, and his expression wasn't one of guilt. It was one of disappointment. "I was hoping I wouldn't have to tell you this way," he said softly. "The trip wasn't just Tokyo. I had to make a last-minute stop in New York. The woman you saw me with, her name is Catherine. The earring is hers. She's my sister." The explanation was so simple, so disarming, it made me feel insane. "Your sister? You've never mentioned a sister." "We're not close," he said, his eyes clouded with a sadness that looked utterly genuine. "Our father left everything to me. She has resented me for it her entire life. I've been trying to mend things with her. I flew her to New York to try and broker a truce. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to bring my family's ugliness into our life. It was my burden to carry, not yours." He pulled me into his arms, his embrace warm and strong. "I'm sorry I lied about my location, Amara. I was protecting you, and I was protecting myself. I was ashamed." And just like that, I believed him. I wanted to believe him. The story of a difficult family, of a lonely man trying to do the right thing, it fit the narrative I had built of him perfectly. I felt ashamed of my suspicion, of my clandestine search through his pockets. He wasn't a liar, he was a protector. The knot of doubt inside me didn't disappear, but I pushed it down, burying it under the weight of my love for him, my need for this to be real. I had found my person, and I would not let a small, explainable lie tear us apart. I chose to trust him, doubling down on my faith. It was a choice that would cost me everything. With my suspicions soothed and my guilt expertly weaponized against me, our relationship accelerated. The lie, and my acceptance of it, became a strange kind of glue. I had doubted him, and he had forgiven me. Now I felt I owed him a deeper level of trust, an unwavering faith to make up for my momentary lapse. We moved from dating to something that felt more like a merger. I spent every night at his home, my own apartment gathering dust, a relic of a life that seemed small and distant. This was when he unveiled his masterpiece. One evening, in his study, surrounded by books on economic theory and ancient history, he laid out his grand vision. "Sterling Thorne is a dinosaur," he began, his voice filled with a quiet, simmering passion. "They're too big, too slow. The real money, the real impact, is an agile, targeted investment. Clean energy, biotech, AI logistics. That's the future. But my name, Aster, comes with too much baggage, too many expectations, too many enemies." He turned to me, his eyes burning with intensity. "I want to build something new, something from the ground up, something that's ours." He slid a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the mahogany desk. The cover was embossed with gold lettering, Aster Okaro Global. My breath caught in my throat, my name next to his. It wasn't just a fantasy, it was a business plan. For the next hour, he walked me through it. A new fund, lean and aggressive, built on the kind of forward-thinking analysis that was my specialty. He made it clear this wasn't just a romantic gesture. He needed me. My mind, my skills, my perspective. He said the betrayal by his old partner had left him unable to trust anyone in his world, anyone who came from money and entitlement. He trusted me because I had built myself from nothing. "I can't do this without you, Amara," he said, his hands enclosing mine over the portfolio. "I need you by my side, not as an employee, but as a full partner. 50-50. Everything we build together." It was the most seductive promise I had ever heard. It wasn't just about love, it was about legacy. It was the validation of every late night, every sacrificed weekend, every ounce of effort I had ever put into my career. But there was a catch. "To do this," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "you'd have to leave Sterlingthorne. We can't have any conflict of interest. We need to be a single, united front. I need you all in. Quitting my job, the job I had just celebrated, the symbol of my independence." A flicker of my old caution, the voice that sounded a lot like Chloe, surfaced. It was a huge risk. To give up my own secure, six-figure salary for a dream? It was as if he could read my mind. He saw the flicker of doubt. The next evening, I was on the phone with my mother. She was telling me about a leak in their roof and how my father's back was acting up again, how he was still working a few shifts at the warehouse despite the doctor's warnings. My voice was tight with worry, a helplessness I hated feeling. I ended the call and walked into the living room to find Julian standing by the window, a somber look on his face. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said gently. "Your parents, they've worked so hard. They deserve to rest." The next day, he told me he had to go look at a piece of commercial property. He asked me to come with him, for my opinion. We drove for an hour, ending up in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, the kind of place my mother always dreamed of. He pulled up in front of a beautiful brick house with a sprawling garden. "What do you think of the neighborhood?" he asked. "It's lovely, Julian, but I don't see any commercial property." "You're right," he said, turning off the engine. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a set of keys, placing them in my hand. "The property wasn't for us. It's for them. It's paid for. The title is in your parents' name. Consider it my signing bonus for our new partner." I stared at the keys, then at the house, then at him. My eyes filled with tears. This wasn't a gift, it was absolution. It was the solution to the one problem I couldn't solve on my own. It was my parents' future, their security, their dream, delivered in a single, impossibly generous act. Any lingering doubt I had evaporated in that moment, burned away by a wave of overwhelming gratitude and love. How could I ever question a man who would do this for my family? The decision was no longer a decision. It was an obligation. I would be a fool, an ungrateful monster, to turn my back on this. The paperwork for Astro Coro Global was drawn up by his personal lawyers. It was a mountain of documents, thick with legal jargon. Julian sat with me as I went through them, pointing out the key clauses. See, 50% ownership, equal voting rights, ironclad. I was a financial analyst, not a corporate lawyer, but it all looked standard. I was so focused on the major clauses, the ownership stake, the capital contributions, his were financial, mine were listed as intellectual property and strategic expertise, that I barely glanced at the appendices, the signature pages, the witness lists. My mind was already in the future, planning our first acquisition, decorating our new corner office. I did notice one thing, a small, irrelevant detail. On the witness signature line for one of the incorporation documents, next to the signature of Julian's lawyer, was another name, Catherine Vance. Vance, not Astor. I paused for a second. "Catherine Vance?" I asked. Julian glanced at it. "Oh, that's Kat. My sister," he said with a casual wave of his hand. "She was in the city, and we needed a second witness. She's married now, took her husband's name. We're still working on things, but having her do this for me was a step in the right direction. It made perfect sense. Of course, she had a different last name. Of course, he would ask his sister to be a witness as an olive branch. The explanation was so smooth, so logical, that I felt foolish for even asking. I saw a piece of evidence that didn't fit, and he supplied a story that made it snap perfectly into place. I didn't see a red flag. I saw a man mending his broken family. The following Monday, I walked into my office at Sterling Thorn Capital and resigned. My boss, a man who had championed my promotion, was stunned. "Amara, this is a mistake," he warned me. "You're at the start of a major career here. Don't throw it away for some guy's passion project." His words were meant as a warning, but to me, they sounded like the dinosaur roaring as the meteor approached. He just didn't get it. Then I called Chloe. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. "You're quitting your job to work for him? And he bought your parents a house?" she finally asked, her voice flat. "It's our company, Chloe, not his. And he didn't buy the house for me, he did it for them. He's the most generous person I've ever met." "Generous people don't need to buy your loyalty, Amara," she said softly. "You're isolating yourself. Can't you see that? You've got no job, no apartment, and you're completely dependent on him." Her words felt like an attack. "You're wrong," I said, my voice cold. "I've never been more independent. I'm finally a partner, an owner. This is everything I've ever worked for." We hung up, the distance between us wider than it had ever been. That night, Julian and I celebrated with champagne in our home. I had given up everything. My job, my apartment, the trust of my best friend. I had signed every document he put in front of me. I had tied my entire future and my family's newfound security to this one man. I held up my glass, looking into the eyes of the man who had seen my worth when no one else had. "To Astro Okoro," I said, my heart swelling with determination and love. "To us," he replied, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. I had made my irrevocable commitment. I had walked through the door and locked it behind me, believing I was stepping into a palace. I had no idea I had just entered the most sophisticated prison ever designed. The first 6 months of Astro Okoro Global were a blur of adrenaline and ambition. We were a 2-person army, and I was the chief strategist. I worked 18-hour days from a sleek, minimalist office Julian had leased, a glass box overlooking the city. My life became a cycle of market analysis, financial modeling, and due diligence. I identified a small, overlooked robotics firm in Austin, a gene editing startup in San Diego, and a data security company in Tel Aviv. I built the financial cases for each, creating pitch decks so compelling they were undeniable. Julian was the frontman. He took my work, my analysis, my strategies, and flew around the world. He was the one who sat in boardrooms in Zurich and Singapore, charming investors and CEOs. He'd call me at all hours, energized and triumphant. "They loved it, Amara. Your projections blew them away. They'd never even considered that market vulnerability." He always used the word your projections, your analysis. But when the news articles came out announcing our first successful acquisitions, they quoted Julian Astor, the visionary investor. My name, Okoro, was there, but it felt like a footnote. I was the silent partner, the engine hidden under the hood. I told myself it was fine. This was the division of labor we had agreed on. I was the architect, he was the salesman. But a cold seed of resentment began to sprout in the pit of my stomach. I was the one sacrificing, the one chained to a desk while he was collecting the accolades. The isolation Chloe had warned me about became my reality. Julian would come home from his trips and fill our evenings with stories of his travels, of the powerful people he'd met. My world, in comparison, felt small. My old friends from Sterling Thorn stopped calling after I missed a few happy hours. When Chloe texted, asking to meet, Julian would glance at my phone. "Is that Chloe again? Doesn't she understand how busy you are? We're building an empire, Amara. Some people just can't see the big picture." He wasn't telling me not to see her, but his tone implied that doing so would be a distraction, a step back into my small old life. So I text her back, "So sorry, swamped." Soon never came. My world shrank until it contained only our apartment, our office, and Julian. He was my partner, my lover, my best friend, my boss, my entire social circle. I was completely, utterly dependent on him. The deception became more intricate, layered into the very fabric of our daily lives. He set up our finances. "It's just easier if we have a joint account for household expenses," he'd said. "Then, let's just run all our personal finances through the main business account. It simplifies the tax situation." I, the financial analyst, handed over control of my own money without a second thought. I was a partner, after all. Our money was our money. Then, the first real crack appeared. I was reconciling our accounts late one night, a habit from my old life I couldn't shake. I found a wire transfer for $250,000. It was sent from our primary capital account to a holding company I didn't recognize, Vance Holdings, LLC. There was no invoice, no corresponding paperwork. It was just gone. When I asked him about it the next morning, he didn't even blink. He poured himself a coffee, his movements calm and measured. "Ah, yes. That's the seed for the big one, darling. The one I haven't told you about yet." He explained that he was in the final stages of a secret, off-book negotiation to acquire a majority stake in a revolutionary battery technology company. "It's so sensitive that I can't even put the name in our records yet." The $250 was a refundable good-faith deposit to secure our place at the table. "Once the deal is done, we'll be bigger than Tesla. This is the one that puts Astro Coro on the map for good." His explanation was so grand, so exciting, it was designed to make my questions seem small and petty. I was worried about $250,000 when he was out hunting multi-billion-dollar whales. The story was a perfect illusion of resolution. He didn't just explain the discrepancy, he made it a testament to his ambition for us. I felt a familiar pang of shame for doubting him. Of course he had a plan. He was Julian Astor. But the seed of resentment was now watered by a trickle of suspicion. I started paying closer attention. I noticed the way his phone was always face down on the table, the way he sometimes took calls in another room, closing the door behind him. Small things, things that could be explained away, but when added together, they formed a pattern. The pressure mounted. Our success was undeniable. The 3 small companies I had identified were thriving under our management, their value tripling in under a year. We were the talk of the financial world, but it was his success. I was a ghostwriter for my own life story. The sacrifices were all mine, my friends, my family, my independence, my name. The glory was all his. Then came the party. To celebrate our 1-year anniversary, Julian decided to host a gathering at our home for our new investors and business partners. "It's time for the world to meet the brilliant mind behind it all," he said, kissing my forehead. "Tonight is all about you, Amara." I felt a surge of hope. Maybe he did see me. Maybe he was finally ready to share the spotlight. I spent the day getting ready, choosing a dress that was both elegant and powerful, a deep emerald green. I wanted to look like a partner and equal. The party was a sea of expensive suits and quiet power. Men I'd only read about in the Wall Street Journal were drinking Julian's expensive scotch in our living room. I moved through the crowd, introduced by Julian as my brilliant partner, Amara. The men would shake my hand, their eyes glancing past me, looking for the next, more important person to talk to. I was still an accessory. About an hour into the party, Julian tapped his glass for attention. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his arm wrapped firmly around my waist. "This has been an incredible year for Astro Coro Global. But I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that none of this would be possible without the faith and backing of our lead investor. She saw the vision from day one, and her commitment has been the bedrock of our success." I smiled, expecting him to mention a fund or a bank. "Please join me in thanking Catherine Vance of the Vance family office." He gestured towards the doorway. And there she stood, the striking redhead from the gala photo in New York. The woman he had called his estranged sister. She was wearing a sharp, black dress, her expression cool and professional. She gave a slight nod to the room, her eyes briefly meeting mine with an unnerving lack of recognition. Catherine Vance, the woman whose name was on our partnership agreement as a witness. The woman whose holding company had received $250,000 of our money. The lead investor. The blood drained from my face. The room started to spin. Every lie he had ever told me clicked into place like tumblers in a lock, and for the first time, I saw the terrifying shape of the truth. His sister, the one he was mending things with, the one who took her husband's name. It was all a lie, a carefully constructed, multi-layered, devastating lie. After the party, when the last guest had departed, I stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by the debris of empty glasses and fake smiles. I felt hollowed out. Julian was loosening his tie, a satisfied smile on his face. "That went well, don't you think?" My voice was quiet, dangerously calm. Catherine Vance. You told me she was your sister. He finally looked at me, his smile fading slightly as he registered my expression. He let out a small, tired sigh, the sound of a man burdened by a difficult truth he was about to share. She is my sister, Amara. I told you that. You told me she was an estranged sister you were trying to make peace with. You told me she witnessed our documents as a family favor. You didn't tell me she was our lead investor. Because it would have complicated things, he said, his voice rising, a note of frustration creeping in. Her family controls one of the oldest private equity funds in the country. They hate me. I had to pitch this to her as a cold, professional deal. If I had told you I was going to my estranged sister for money, you would have worried. You would have been stressed. I was protecting you. I was protecting the business. I handled it. Isn't that what a partner does? Handle the difficult things, so the other can focus on what they do best. He was twisting it again, turning his monumental deception into an act of benevolent protection. He was painting me as a fragile creature who couldn't handle the truth, while he was a strong leader making tough choices for our own good. A few months ago, I would have believed him. I would have felt guilty for my anger. But something had broken. I looked at him, at this man I thought I knew, and I saw a stranger. A master strategist who had played me with the same cold calculation he used on the market. My love, my trust, my work, they weren't part of a partnership. They were assets he had acquired to build his empire. I didn't say another word. I walked into our study and pulled out the leather-bound portfolio for Astro Coro Global. I turned to the signature pages, my hand shaking. I looked at my signature, then at his, and then at the witness line. Catherine Vance. I finally understood. She wasn't a witness to our partnership. She was a witness to my surrender. The dread that had been a trickle was now a flood, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was about to drown. The night after the party was silent and cold. We slept on opposite sides of the massive bed, a chasm of unspoken words between us. When I woke up, Julian was already dressed, standing by the window, sipping an espresso. He turned, a perfectly pleasant smile on his face, as if the seismic rift that had opened between us was just my imagination. "Morning, darling," he said. "I have to head out for a few hours. A meeting with the board of that robotics firm. They're getting anxious about our Q4 rollout." He was testing me. He was trying to pull me back into the familiar rhythm of our work, to see if I would take the bait and start talking about quarterly reports. A year ago I would have. Even a week ago I would have. But the woman who had gone to sleep last night was not the woman who woke up this morning. The old Amara was gone, replaced by a cold, watchful stranger. "Okay," I said, my voice empty of emotion. He paused, his smile faltering for a second. He was expecting questions, tears, and argument. My calm was more unnerving to him than any emotional outburst would have been. He gave a small nod, set his cup down, and left without another word. The moment the front door clicked shut, I was out of bed. I didn't shower. I didn't get dressed. I went straight to his study, the heart of our supposed empire, and closed the door. The room smelled of leather and his expensive cologne, a scent I once found comforting. Now it was the smell of the trap. I went to the safe hidden behind a false panel of books. I knew the combination. He had given it to me himself in a grand gesture of total transparency. Inside, beneath files for his offshore accounts and property deeds, was our original partnership agreement. The thick, leather-bound portfolio. My hands were steady as I lifted it out and placed it on the desk. I started at page 1. I read every word, not as a hopeful partner, but as a forensic accountant looking for the fraud. I scanned past the grand declarations of our shared vision, the clauses about our 50-50 split. I was looking for the fine print, the loophole, the dagger he had hidden in the jargon. And then I found it. It was in Appendix B, Section 4, a subsection titled Conditions of Partnership Vesting. It was a dense paragraph, deliberately convoluted, but the language was clear if you knew what you were looking for. My 50% stake was not immediate. It was provisional. My shares were held in a non-voting trust and would only be vested and released to me upon the unanimous approval of the founding partner, Julian Astor, and the primary capital investor, unnamed, but referenced as the entity detailed in Appendix C, after a 12-month performance review period. My blood turned to ice. I flipped to Appendix C, Primary Capital Investor, the Vance family office, represented by Catherine Vance. The 12-month review period had ended last week. The party wasn't a celebration of our anniversary. It was the finish line. I wasn't a partner. I was a contractor on a 1-year trial. A trial that had just expired. All my work, all my discoveries, all the value I had created, it all belonged to the company. And I didn't own a single real share of the company. My name, Okoro, on the door was just branding. I felt a wave of nausea, so profound I had to grip the edge of the desk. I had been so blinded by the promise of partnership, so seduced by the grand gesture of putting my name next to his, that I had missed the most fundamental clause. He had used my financial expertise against me, knowing I wouldn't look for a betrayal so deeply embedded in the legal architecture. But this was only the paper. I needed to see the money. I sat down at his computer, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I logged into our central accounting server. I bypassed the clean, summarized reports he always showed me and went straight into the raw transaction logs. I searched for Vance Holdings LLC. There it was. Not just the one payment of $250,000. There was a payment every single month for the last 12 months. It was labeled Strategic Consulting Fee. $250,000 every month. $3 million in total. Drained from our operating capital and funneled directly to Catherine. My stomach twisted. The money I thought we were reinvesting, the profits I was working so hard to generate, were being siphoned off to her before I ever saw a dime. I was staring at the screen, the numbers blurring through my tears, when I heard the front door open. My heart leaped into my throat. He was back. Too soon. I didn't have time to cover my tracks. I heard him moving around in the hallway. Then I heard his voice, not talking to me but on the phone. And it was on speaker. No, she didn't say a thing. Just stared at me, he was saying. He was walking towards the study. I scrambled, ducking down behind a large leather desk, just as the door swung open. I could see his shoes through the gap. He sat down in the chair I had just vacated. A woman's voice, crisp and cold, came through the phone speaker. Catherine's voice. She's not stupid, Julian. She's putting it together. Did you secure the intellectual property assignments? Of course, Julian said, his voice stripped of all the warmth he used with me. It was the voice of a different man, a cold, ruthless stranger. Everything she's created, every algorithm, every piece of analysis, is legally firewalled as a work-for-hire asset of Astro Okoro. She signed the employment agreement the same day she signed the partnership Mirage. Page 73 of the welcome packet. The welcome packet, a stack of HR forms and insurance papers he'd given me to sign when we started, telling me it was just standard boilerplate. I had signed it without reading. Good, Catherine said. Then Phase 1 is officially complete. Her performance review is tomorrow. We'll inform her that her trial period has been a success, but we've decided to restructure. Offer her a generous severance. A few $100,000. She'll sign an NDA and disappear. She's smart, but she's sentimental. She won't fight. And the house? Julian asked. Her parents are living in a $2 million asset. The title is in a trust controlled by us, Catherine replied coolly. We gave her parents lifetime tenancy, contingent on her good behavior and compliance with the terms of her separation agreement. If she makes a fuss, they're on the street. It's the perfect leverage. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle a sob. My parents' dream house wasn't a gift. It was a cage, a gilded chain to ensure my silence. Then Julian laughed. A short, ugly sound completely devoid of humor. You know, the funny thing is, the whole thing almost didn't happen. That first night at the Sovereign, she almost said no. The pretend I'm your husband routine, Catherine said, a hint of amusement in her voice. I still can't believe that worked. It was so theatrical. It was perfect, Julian countered. It framed me as a man in need of rescue. It created immediate intimacy, and it established me as someone living in a world of high stakes she wanted to be a part of. It was the perfect psychological hook for a woman who was desperate to feel like the star of her own movie. And Amara Okoro was nothing if not desperate. The words hit me with the force of a physical impact. Every moment of our relationship flashed before my eyes, recontextualized into a hideous tableau of manipulation. The whisper in the restaurant, the story of his lonely childhood, the fake fight with his estranged sister, the praise for my brilliant mind, our shared dreams. It was all a script, a meticulously planned, flawlessly executed corporate takeover of my life. I wasn't the partner. I wasn't even the employee. I was the asset, a mine of intellectual property to be excavated, and once it was exhausted, I was to be discarded. He had stripped me of my career, my friends, my money, my family security, and my own name. He had taken my deepest insecurities, my loneliness, my need to be seen, my desire to provide for my parents, and forged them into weapons to be used against me. The love I felt for him, a love that had felt so real and profound, was just a hallucination he had induced. From my hiding place behind the desk, I looked at the man's expensive Italian shoes. The man I had loved. The man I had trusted with everything I had. And I understood. This was not a betrayal. A betrayal implies there was once loyalty. This was a hunt, and I had been the prey. The devastation was absolute, a black hole opening up in my chest, consuming everything. I was trapped, penniless, and alone. I had nothing left to lose, because I had just discovered that I never had anything to begin with. I stayed frozen under that desk for what felt like an eternity. The sound of Julian's chair scraping against the floorboards as he stood up was like a gunshot in the silent room. He walked out, leaving the phone call on speaker. I heard Catherine's voice, sharp and final. "Call me after it's done." Then the click of the call ending. I heard his footsteps recede down the hall, the heavy thud of the front door closing, and then silence. A silence so complete it rang in my ears. My limbs were stiff, my muscles screaming from being coiled in the small space. Slowly, painfully, I crawled out. I rose to my feet, my body feeling like it belonged to someone else. I looked around the study, his study. The books, the awards, the portfolio on the desk. It was all a stage, and I had been the unwitting lead actress in a tragedy. His words echoed in my head, a venomous loop. A woman who was desperate to feel like the star of her own movie. He hadn't just stolen my work. He had stolen my identity, my very perception of myself, and replaced it with this pathetic, needy caricature. My first instinct was to smash everything, to shatter the glass frames, to tear the books from their shelves. But my anger was a cold, dense star inside me, too heavy to fuel any physical action. I was numb. I couldn't stay here. I had to leave before he came back. I moved through the apartment like a ghost, my feet silent on the polished floors. What could I take? My clothes were bought with his money. The jewelry he'd given me felt like shackles. I went into the bedroom and found my old purse, the one I'd had on our first date. Inside, miraculously, were the keys to my old apartment. I had never officially moved out, just stopped going there. I didn't know if the lease was even still valid. I grabbed my phone and charger. That was it. I walked out of that palace of lies with nothing but the clothes on my back and a set of keys to a life I had abandoned. The next morning, an email arrived. The subject line was chillingly simple. Performance review, 10 a.m. It was from Julian's assistant. He wanted me to come to the office, to the glass box where I had poured out my soul for a year. He was going to execute me in the very place I had built. I walked into the office at 9:59 a.m. Julian was there, standing beside Catherine. They were a perfect power couple, composed and severe. The warmth was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cool, professional distance. "Amara, thank you for coming," he began, as if I were a junior hire. "As you know, your first year with the firm has concluded. Catherine and I have reviewed your performance." Catherine spoke for the first time, her voice exactly as I remembered from the phone. "Your analytical work has been exceptional. You exceeded all our initial projections. You have been a tremendous asset." Asset. The word hung in the air, a final confirmation. "However," Julian continued, "as we move into phase 2, our strategic needs are shifting. We're moving towards a more aggressive, public-facing model, and we've decided to restructure the partnership." He slid a thick document across the glass table. "This is a separation agreement. In recognition of your contributions, we are offering a severance package of $500,000. I looked at the document. It was an offer of silence. blood money. The agreement includes a standard non-disclosure and non-compete clause, Catherine added, her eyes like chips of ice. And of course, it confirms the lifetime tenancy for your parents at their current residence, contingent upon the smooth execution of this agreement. There it was, the threat, delivered with the sterile precision of a surgeon. Sign the papers, take the money, and disappear, or your parents will be homeless. They had thought of everything. They had left me no escape route. I looked from Julian's impassive face to Catherine's smug one. My rage was a physical thing, a pressure building behind my eyes. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that if I let it show, I would lose. They expected tears. They expected hysterics. They expected me to be the sentimental, desperate woman Julian had described. I would give them none of it. I see, I said, my voice quiet and steady. I picked up the agreement. I'll need some time to have my attorney review this. Julian's mask slipped for a fraction of a second. A flicker of surprise. He had expected me to fold immediately. Of course, he said, recovering quickly. Take 48 hours. They were confident. What attorney could I possibly afford? I walked out of that office, the heavy document in my hand, and stepped onto the street. The city bustled around me, oblivious. I was officially homeless, jobless, and penniless. I had 48 hours before the guillotine fell. I walked for blocks, the motion the only thing keeping the crushing weight of despair at bay. Then I stopped. I pulled out my phone. My fingers trembled as I scrolled to a name I hadn't called in almost a year. Chloe. She answered on the second ring. Amara. Her voice was laced with surprise. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. A choked sob escaped instead. Amara, what is it? Where are you? The surprise in her voice was replaced by sharp alarm. You were right, I finally whispered, the words tasting like ash. You were right about everything. There was a pause, and then, tell me where you are. I'm coming to get you. An hour later, I was sitting on Chloe's comfortable, slightly cluttered sofa, a mug of tea warming my cold hands. The house was filled with the sounds of a normal life, a dishwasher humming, a child's cartoon playing softly in the other room. It felt like a foreign country. I told her everything, from the overheard conversation to the meeting in the glass office. I didn't cry. I was too far beyond tears. My voice was a flat monotone, reciting the facts of my own destruction. When I finished, Chloe didn't say, I told you so. She stared at me, her face a mask of cold fury. That absolute monster, she breathed. He didn't just break your heart, Amara. He strip-mined your life. She stood up and started pacing. An attorney. That's the first thing. You need a real shark. I can't afford a bus ticket, Chloe, let alone a shark, I said, the reality of my situation finally sinking in. And he has my parents. If I fight, he'll throw them out. I have to sign it. I have no choice. There's always a choice, she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. We both knew the truth. He had built the perfect prison. The next 24 hours were a descent into a special kind of hell. I tried to access my old bank account. It had been closed due to inactivity. My credit cards had been canceled. I called the landlord for my old apartment. The lease had been terminated 2 months ago. Julian had paid the penalty and had the contents put in storage, all without my knowledge. He had systematically erased every trace of my old life, ensuring I had nothing to fall back on. I was trapped in Chloe's guest room, the separation agreement lying on the nightstand like a death certificate. Every option led to disaster. Sign it, and I condemn myself to a life of silence, letting him get away with it all, living on the hush money he was offering me. Fight it, and my parents lose everything, their health and happiness collateral damage in a war I couldn't win. That night I called them. My mother's voice was bright and happy. She talked about the roses blooming in her new garden, about how my father was finally sleeping through the night, his back no longer in agony. She told me how proud she was of me, of the wonderful man I was with, and the incredible company we were building. We pray for you and Julian every night, my love, she said. He is a gift from God. I listened, my stomach churning with bile, and I played my part. I'm so glad you're happy, Mama, I said, my voice cracking just once. I told her I loved her and hung up the phone. I collapsed onto the bed, the full weight of my moral anguish pressing down on me. He had made me a liar to my own parents. He had used their happiness to guarantee my misery. I stared up at the ceiling, feeling the four walls of the room closing in. This was rock bottom. He had taken everything. My career, my reputation, my money, my friends, my love, my very sense of self. I was nothing. An erased woman. Julian Astor had won. He had played the long game, and I had been the pawn. The despair was a physical presence, a heavy blanket suffocating me. There was no way out. I lay on the guest bed in Chloe's house, the ceiling fan turning slow, lazy circles above me. It was 3 a.m. on the final day. In 7 hours, my 48 hours would be up. The separation agreement was on the nightstand, its crisp pages glowing in the dim light from the street lamp outside. My phone was in my hand. I had already typed the message to Julian. I accept the terms. Send the final documents. My thumb hovered over the send button. This was the end. I would take the money, ensure my parents were safe, and then I would simply cease to exist. I would find some quiet town where no one knew my name and live out my days as a ghost, haunted by the woman I was supposed to be. It was the only choice. A choice between my freedom and my parents' happiness wasn't a choice at all. Just as my thumb was about to press down, the bedroom door creaked open. Chloe stood in the doorway, a glass of water in her hand. She looked at the phone in my hand, at my face, and she knew. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice a fierce whisper. She walked in and sat on the edge of the bed. "Don't you let that monster win. Don't let him erase you." "He's already won, Chloe," I said, my voice hollow. "He has my parents. What am I supposed to do? Let them be thrown out on the street to protect my pride." "This isn't about pride, Amara," she said, her voice rising with an anger I had never heard from her before. She leaned in close, her eyes boring into mine. "He didn't just target you. He studied you. He found your every strength and twisted it into a vulnerability. Your ambition, your loyalty, your love for your family. He weaponized the best parts of you against you. You think signing that paper is you choosing your family? It's not. It's you letting him finish the job. It's you agreeing with his assessment of you, that you're just a sentimental, desperate woman who will roll over when things get tough." Her words were a slap in the face. He had called me sentimental. He had banked on it. He was counting on my love for my family to make me predictable, to make me weak. He had forgotten who I was before I met him. "He thinks you're a romantic," Chloe went on, her voice like steel. "He's forgotten you're a predator. The woman I know, the woman who could look at a 10,000-line spreadsheet and find the one fraudulent number in 5 minutes, she hunts. She doesn't hide. So hunt him." Something inside me shifted. A tiny, cold flicker in the vast darkness of my despair. A third option. Not signing or fighting his way, but fighting my way. He had beaten me at his game of emotional manipulation. But my game was different. My game was data. My game was patterns. His entire strategy is built on a narrative, I said, thinking aloud, the gears of my mind beginning to turn for the first time in days. The narrative of the lonely billionaire, the estranged sister, the secret deal. Every lie is a piece of a larger story. What if the story itself is the weakness? I sat up, the phone forgotten in my hand. Chloe saw the change in my eyes, and a slow smile spread across her face. "There she is," she whispered. "I need your laptop," I said. "And coffee. A lot of coffee." For the next 5 hours, Chloe's guest room became my war room. I didn't have access to his servers anymore, but I had something more valuable, my memory. I had lived and breathed Astrocoro Global for a year. I mapped out every deal, every phone call I'd overheard, every name he had ever mentioned. I created a timeline, a web of connections. And at the center of that web was the biggest lie of all, Catherine Vance. His sister. He said she took her husband's name. I murmured, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "Let's find the husband." Chloe and I started digging. We searched public records, social media archives, old society pages from New York papers. We searched for a Catherine Astor. We searched for any marriage records for a Catherine Vance. Nothing. It was as if she didn't exist outside of her corporate identity. "It's a ghost," Chloe said in frustration after 2 hours of dead ends. "No," I said, a sudden, chilling certainty washing over me. He's too meticulous to create a ghost. He builds his lies on a foundation of truth. We're just asking the wrong question. My mind raced back to the earring. The trip to New York. The way he looked at her at the party, not like a brother, but like a co-conspirator. I typed a new search into a database of national marriage licenses, a long shot. I typed in Julian Astor. And then in the spouse field, I typed Catherine Vance. I hit enter. And there it was. A marriage certificate, issued 5 years ago in a small, private ceremony in Greenwich, Connecticut. Julian Astor and Catherine Vance. They weren't brother and sister. They were husband and wife. The room tilted. I stared at the screen, the pieces of the puzzle rearranging themselves with dizzying speed into a single, monstrous image. The story of the estranged sister was a lie to cover the fact that his lead investor was his wife. The money diverted to Vance Holdings wasn't a consulting fee. It was him paying his own wife with the capital I was generating. Our entire company, the 50-50 partnership, was a fraudulent construction designed to use my intellect to build a private family fund for him and his wife, a fund built on my back, designed to be stolen from me from the very first day. The name Astor Okoro was the final, sickening joke. It was never a partnership. It was a brand. "Oh my God!" Chloe breathed, looking over my shoulder. "Amara! This changes everything," I said, a cold, hard clarity cutting through my despair. This wasn't just a breach of contract. This was conspiracy to commit fraud. They hadn't just used me. They had used their marriage as a secret weapon to do it. But proof and a plan were two different things. I needed a lawyer. "I know someone," Chloe said immediately, already grabbing her phone. "She's not a fancy corporate lawyer. She's the woman you call when you need to burn someone's life to the ground. Her name is Evelyn Reed." 2 hours later, I was sitting in a small, chaotic office in a less fashionable part of town. Evelyn Reed was a woman in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that radiated competence. She listened to my story without interruption, her face unreadable. I could see the skepticism in her eyes. To her, I was just another woman with a story of a rich man who did her wrong. So I stopped telling the story. I opened Chloe's laptop, and I showed her the data. I walked her through my analysis, the timeline of deception, the flow of money from Astor Okoro to Vance Holdings. I showed her the vesting clause hidden in Appendix B and the employment agreement that stripped me of my IP. And then, for the finale, I showed her the marriage certificate. Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the screen. The skepticism vanished, replaced by the keen, hungry look of a shark that has just scented blood in the water. She looked up at me, and for the first time she smiled. "Well, damn," she said. "This isn't a lawsuit, Ms. Okoro. This is a corporate decapitation." She leaned back in her chair. "They built a perfect cage for you, but they made one colossal mistake. They thought the asset they were acquiring was your financial skill. They didn't realize the real asset was your brain. And they left it inside the cage with you." She explained the strategy. "We wouldn't sue for wrongful termination. We would file a preliminary injunction to freeze all assets of Astor Okoro Global, pending an investigation into criminal fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. The marriage certificate was the key. It proved intent. But my parents..." I started. "He threatens their house. We file a motion for elder abuse and emotional distress, citing the fraudulent inducement that put them in the house in the first place. We'll paint him in the press as a man who uses an elderly immigrant couple as pawns in his corporate games. He's built his reputation on being a visionary. We'll expose him as a common thief who's married to the bank." Hope. It was a feeling so foreign I almost didn't recognize it. It bloomed in my chest, fierce and bright. I had a choice. A real one. It wasn't an easy choice. It was a declaration of war. But it was mine. My phone buzzed. A text from Julian. 10 a.m. Time's up. I looked at Evelyn. She raised an eyebrow. "Well, Miss Okoro, do we let the timer run out, or do we light the fuse?" I thought about the woman I was 48 hours ago, huddled in the dark, ready to surrender. I thought about the whisper in the restaurant, the lie about his sister, the cold, dead look in his eyes when he cast me aside. He had tried to erase me, but he had failed. I picked up my phone and typed a reply. "I'm going to need an extension." Then I looked at Evelyn Reed, my voice clear and steady for the first time in a year. "Light it." The text message from Julian was the last communication I received. It was a digital sneer, a final twist of the knife. After that, silence. I didn't go to the office. I didn't call. I let the 48 hours expire, leaving them to wonder. Evelyn told me this was the first move. Take away their certainty. Let them sit in their glass tower, wondering what the sentimental, desperate woman was planning. The next 6 months were the hardest of my life. They were also the most real. Evelyn's plan was simple and brutal. We would not engage in a protracted legal battle they could win by attrition. We would starve them, then we would strike. The first thing she did was file the preliminary injunction. It was a missile launched into the heart of their operations. A judge, looking at the marriage certificate and the wire transfers to a company owned by the wife of the managing partner, immediately granted a temporary freeze on all of Astro Coro Global's assets. Their world stopped. Deals were suspended. Accounts were locked. Julian and Catherine were suddenly trapped in their own empire, unable to move a single dollar without court approval. They fought back, of course. Their high-priced lawyers filed motion after motion, claiming it was a frivolous suit by a disgruntled former employee. But the evidence of the undisclosed marital relationship was a poison pill in every argument they made. While they were drowning in legal paperwork, I was rebuilding. I lived in Chloe's guest room, which she and her husband insisted was now the Amara Okoro war room. My life became a singular obsession. I didn't want justice anymore. Justice was a court-ordered settlement. I wanted vindication. I wanted to beat them at their own game. Evelyn worked pro bono, with a contingency fee that would give her a piece of whatever we recovered. "Don't worry about my fee," she'd said with a grin. "The satisfaction of taking these two down is payment enough. The millions of dollars will just be a bonus." During the asset freeze, all of Astro Coro's portfolio companies were in limbo. Julian couldn't invest more capital, and he couldn't sell them. They were paralyzed, and I knew them better than he did. I knew their strengths, their weaknesses, their next moves. He had bought my analysis, but he had never truly understood it. "He's over-leveraged in the robotics firm," I told Evelyn one night, pointing at a flowchart I had drawn on a whiteboard. "And he completely underestimated the regulatory hurdles for the gene-editing startup. But the real vulnerability, it's the battery company. The revolutionary battery company he had lied about, the one he claimed the $250,000 wire was for. It turned out to be real. It was their crown jewel, a company called Voltaic Systems that had a patent for a new type of solid-state battery that could change the energy sector forever. Astro Coro had acquired a 40% stake, their biggest investment. But I knew something he didn't. I knew the lead engineer at Voltaic was unhappy. I had been the one to identify his importance during my due diligence, a fact Julian had overlooked. While Julian was fighting legal battles, I found that engineer. I used Chloe's husband's network of tech contacts to get a meeting. I didn't have money to offer him, but I had something better, a vision that wasn't built on lies. Simultaneously, with Evelyn's help, I formed a small, independent consulting firm. I had no capital, but I had my brain. I took my analysis of the battery market and identified Voltaic's main competitor, a struggling but brilliant startup called Helios Innovations. I approached a small, hungry venture capital fund that Evelyn knew. I didn't ask them for a job. I presented them with a 30-page report on why Helios was a better investment than Voltaic and a step-by-step plan for how to acquire it and leverage its technology to corner the market. The VC fund was blown away. They didn't just invest in Helios, they hired my firm to oversee the strategy. For the first time in a year, I had my own income. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I finally moved out of Chloe's guest room and into a small, functional apartment. I was no longer a victim. I was a competitor. The perfect venue for the climax presented itself 6 months after the freeze began, the Global Innovators Summit, a massive, televised event where the biggest names in tech and finance gathered. The keynote speaker was Julian Astor. The topic of his speech was trust and transparency in modern investment. The hypocrisy was so staggering it was beautiful. "This is it," I told Evelyn. "This is where we end it." I arrived at the grand ballroom of the hotel an hour into the summit. I wasn't an invited guest. I had used a small fraction of my consulting fees to buy a standard attendee ticket. I wore a simple, dark red dress. It wasn't flashy, but it was tailored perfectly. It was the dress of a woman who belonged in the room, not one who was trying to prove she did. I stood at the back of the cavernous room as Julian took the stage to thunderous applause. He was in his element, charming and confident. Catherine was in the front row, looking at him with an expression of proprietary pride. He spoke about vision, about partnership, about building a better future. Every word was a lie, polished to a brilliant shine. When he finished his speech, the moderator opened the floor for questions. This was my moment. I walked calmly to the microphone in the center aisle. There was a murmur as people saw me, a woman of color standing alone, waiting her turn. "Mr. Astor," I began, my voice amplified throughout the hall, steady and clear. Julian's eyes scanned the crowd, and then they found me. His smile froze on his face. It was a micro-expression, a flicker of pure shock, before his professional mask snapped back into place. Catherine, in the front row, went rigid. "An excellent presentation," I continued, my voice betraying no emotion. "You spoke at length about transparency. I have a question about risk management within your own portfolio, specifically regarding undisclosed related party transactions and their potential to create significant liabilities for your investors. For example, when a founding partner is in a legally binding, long-term personal and financial partnership, such as a marriage, with a primary capital investor, yet this relationship is not disclosed in any offering documents. Could you speak to how Astor Global mitigates that specific and very significant risk?" Silence. The entire room, hundreds of the most powerful people in the world, went completely quiet. You could hear a pin drop. The question was a perfectly crafted missile, wrapped in bland corporate jargon. Julian stared at me, his face pale. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "Perhaps your lead investor, Miss Catherine Vance, would like to field that question?" I added, turning my gaze to the front row. Catherine stood up, her face a mask of fury. "This is neither the time nor the place for baseless accusations from a disgruntled former employee," she said, her voice sharp. "Then let's talk about facts, not accusations," I said. I pulled a flash drive from my purse. I walked to the tech podium at the side of the stage. If I could just borrow the projector for a moment? Before anyone could stop me, I had plugged it in. The first image that flashed onto the massive screen behind the stage was the marriage certificate. Julian Astor and Catherine Vance. A collective gasp went through the audience. "This is a public record," I stated calmly. The next image was a flowchart of the wire transfers from Astor Global to Vance Holdings, LLC. $3 million. And these are bank records, obtained legally during discovery. Julian finally found his voice. "This is a private matter. Security." But it was too late. I wasn't finished. I turned to face him on the stage, stepping into the spotlight. "You're right, Julian," I said, my voice resonating with a power I didn't know I possessed. "It is a private matter. Just like it was a private matter when you whispered in my ear at the Sovereign and asked me to pretend to be your wife to start this whole charade. Just like it was a private matter when you used my analysis, my intellect, my work to build this company, all while I was legally classified as a work-for-hire employee with no rights to my own intellectual property. You told your wife I was a sentimental, desperate woman, desperate to feel like the star of her own movie. Well, you were right about one thing. This is my movie, and you don't get to write the ending." I looked out at the sea of shocked faces. Astor Global was built on a lie. The partnership was a lie. The name on the door was a lie. Then, I delivered the final, fatal blow. But while you two were busy fighting my injunctions, you took your eye off the ball. You got slow. A real innovator, a real visionary, never stops looking for the next opportunity. While you were fixated on your stolen assets, the market shifted. I gave a small, cold smile. 2 days ago, my new firm, Okaro Strategic, in partnership with the McLean Venture Fund, completed its first major acquisition. We've acquired a 51% controlling stake in Helios Innovations, the primary competitor to your crown jewel, Voltaic Systems. And yesterday, Voltaic's entire senior engineering team, led by Dr. Eris Thorne, resigned. They started Helios on Monday. Your battery company, the one asset not completely frozen by the courts, is now a worthless shell. Julian looked like he had been physically struck. Catherine sank back into her chair, her face ashen. They hadn't just been exposed. They had been outmaneuvered, defeated. I hadn't just taken back my life. I had taken their future. Security guards were moving towards the stage now, but they were too late. The damage was done. The cameras were flashing. Reporters were shouting. The public humiliation was absolute. I turned and looked at Julian one last time. The charming visionary was gone. In his place was a small, defeated man, his empire crumbling around him on a public stage. I felt nothing. No hate, no pity. Just the quiet, clean satisfaction of a problem that had been solved. I had not just survived. I had won. I didn't run. I walked off that stage with the deliberate, unhurried pace of someone who had already won. The ballroom was in chaos, a cacophony of shouting reporters and flashing cameras. Security guards were trying to form a line to protect Julian and Catherine, who stood frozen on the stage like statues in a lightning storm. As I reached the exit, a hand touched my arm. I turned, ready for a confrontation, but it was Evelyn. She had been waiting by the door, a small, grimly satisfied smile on her face. She held up my coat. "I believe this is yours, Miss Okoro," she said, her voice a calm island in the sea of noise. "Shall we go?" "I believe our work here is done." We walked out into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage of Julian Astor's life behind us. We didn't look back. The aftermath was a swift and brutal demolition. The video of my speech at the summit went viral. Financial news networks played it on a loop. My carefully worded question, the marriage certificate, the final, devastating reveal of my acquisition of Helios, it was a corporate assassination broadcast live to the world. Julian and Catherine's empire collapsed not with a bang, but with the dry rustle of legal papers. Investors pulled out. The board of the robotics firm resigned en masse. With their assets frozen and their reputation in tatters, Astor Okoro Global was dead in the water. The court-appointed receiver began the process of liquidating what was left. Their partnership, forged in conspiracy, fractured under the pressure of failure. News outlets reported that Catherine filed for divorce within a month, citing irreconcilable differences. Her lawyers argued that she was a victim of Julian's fraud as much as I was. They turned on each other, each trying to salvage a piece of their fortune from the wreckage, their private war playing out in ugly legal filings that became public fodder. My lawsuit was settled quickly and quietly. With the mountain of evidence against them, they had no choice. It wasn't a severance package, it was restitution. A settlement that gave me the capital to not just survive, but to build. The first thing I did, the only thing that truly mattered, was have Evelyn secure the title to my parents' house. The deed was transferred into their names, free and clear of any trusts or contingencies. The cage was unlocked. The chain was broken. Calling my mother was the hardest and most healing thing I did. I didn't tell her the whole sordid story. I didn't need to. I told her that Julian and I had gone our separate ways, that the business had ended, and that I was starting my own. I told her the house was theirs, a true gift this time, with no strings attached. There was a long silence on the phone. Then my mother said, her voice thick with emotion, "Amara, I don't know what happened, but I know my daughter. You are strong. You are a good person. Your father and I, we are not proud of you because of a house or a company. We are proud of you because you are our child. You survived. That is all that matters." In that moment, I realized the love he tried to use as leverage was actually my armor. My friendship with Chloe was forged into something unbreakable. We were no longer two women on different paths. We were sisters who had been through a war together. A year to the day after my takedown at the summit, I had a dinner reservation. For one, I went back to the Sovereign. I walked in, and this time, heads did turn. The maitre d' rushed over, addressing me by name. "Ms. Okoro, your table is ready." He led me to the same table in the corner. I sat down, the leather of the seat feeling different this time. It wasn't a seat for an invisible woman, it was a throne. My company, Okoro Strategic, was thriving. Helios Innovations, under the leadership of its new engineering team, had just unveiled a battery prototype that was set to revolutionize the electric vehicle market. Our initial investors had seen their stake increase tenfold. I was no longer the ghostwriter of my own story. I was the author, the editor, and the publisher. I ordered a glass of the best champagne on the menu, not as a defiant act of loneliness, but as a quiet acknowledgement of my own power. I looked around the room, at the couples and the business partners, and I felt no envy. I felt a profound sense of peace. My life was my own. A man approached my table. He was one of the partners from the McLean Venture Fund, the firm that had believed in me when I had nothing. "Amara," he said, smiling warmly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, David," I said, gesturing to the empty chair. "Please join me. We have a future to discuss." He sat down, and as the waiter came over, I thought about that first night here. About the whisper that was supposed to be the beginning of my captivity. "Pretend I'm your husband." He meant for me to be a prop in his story. He wanted me to play a role. And in the end, I did. I played the role of the woman who took everything he had and built something better from the rubble. The journey was devastating, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But it taught me that my worth was never determined by who saw me, but by how clearly I saw myself. The pain carved me out, but my strength, my family, and my friends filled me back up. And that's the story of how a whispered lie in a restaurant led me here. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, for listening to my journey. I hope it resonated with you in some way. We all face moments that try to break us, moments where we feel invisible or used. But it's in those moments that we discover the true depth of our strength. What did you think of the story? What was the moment that hooked you the most? Drop a comment below. I love reading your thoughts and connecting with all of you. And if you haven't already, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. You have no idea how much it helps, and I promise, the next story I have for you is one you won't want to miss. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember to be the author of your own story.